Some mornings start with birdsong, and some start with the sound of concrete pouring into a stream. My name is Mark Dawson. I am 49 years old, hydraulic engineer. I've lived in Willow Ridge Estates for over 15 years, and I chose this place for one reason only: the small stream that runs behind my house, not for the view, not for fishing, but because I knew, geologically, hydrologically, and ecologically, it was the lifeblood of this entire area. That morning started like any other. A.M., a cup of black coffee in hand. I stood on my back deck, watching the morning light dance across the water. The stream flowed quietly over the rocks, clear as glass, frogs croaking from the tall grass. Kids in the neighborhood often came here to catch tadpoles in the spring. Seniors brought folding chairs to read by the bank. Teachers brought students here for ecology lessons, a rare pocket of peace in a chaotic world. Until I heard the growl of heavy machinery. I rushed down to the backyard, and then I froze. A concrete mixer truck was actually dumping a thick gray industrial sludge directly into the stream behind my house, pouring from above like someone was coating nature's heart in cement. Holding a clipboard and barking orders was Claire Monroe, president of the Willow Ridge HOA, known for her platinum blonde hair, syrupy voice, and an ego bigger than the HOA's annual budget. I yelled, "What the hell are you doing? This is a natural stream." Claire turned, smiling the kind of smile people in my field call smiling to deceive. "Good morning, Mark. We're redeveloping this area into a luxury tennis court and a children's park. The project's been approved. Residents will be thrilled when property values jump at least 30%. I wanted to drag her face down into the water, what was left of it, now turning into concrete sludge. You can't pour concrete into a stream. You know that. I can, and I did. The board voted 9-4. You lost, Mark. And that's when I realized I'd been outplayed. I remembered that emergency meeting they held on a Tuesday afternoon, right in the middle of working hours, when 80% of residents were still at their jobs. Claire had called it a community beautification discussion, never mentioned blocking the stream, never said anything about concrete, never said a damn word about destroying an entire ecosystem. Just a few yoga moms and retirees showed up. She painted a picture of picnics under trees, a bubbling brook beside a walking trail. A perfect PR trap. A sham vote. I went back to my porch, coffee cup trembling in hand. I looked down at the water, where minnows, turtles, and kingfishers used to live, where tree roots dipped into the current. Now, a layer of gray concrete had begun to set, sealing everything shut. I didn't cry. I was furious. That's when my neighbor, Walter Green, a retired attorney who's lived here longer than the security gate has existed, stepped out in his bathrobe, teacup in hand. "Mark, this is illegal. That stream's been here since before the neighborhood. My dad used to fish there when this place was still woods." I nodded. My chest burned like a pressure boiler with its valve clamped shut. "Don't worry, Walter. I'm going to handle this." That night, I didn't sleep. I opened my laptop and dug through every HOA meeting minute, every bylaw, every financial report, every project blueprint. And guess what I found? Claire is a shareholder in the construction company doing the project. That name, Riverstone Contractors, was her personal cash cow. Not just corruption, but conflict of interest, board manipulation, and a calculated environmental assault. That's when I knew. I wasn't just fighting to protect a stream. I was going to expose an entire rotten system hiding behind the words community tennis court. And I wasn't going to do it by screaming. I was going to use the very things Claire Monroe couldn't understand or control: science, history, and water. I didn't sleep that night. While Claire Monroe, queen of the clipboard, was probably sipping Chardonnay and basking in her imagined legacy, I was knee-deep in HOA files, meeting minutes, zoning maps, and water surveys that dated back before she was born. What I found, it made my blood boil. First, the meeting minutes, the vote that approved the concrete project, doctored. Claire had claimed a 9-4 result. Reality? It was 6-5 with 2 abstentions. And several board members had specifically raised concerns about insufficient information regarding environmental impact. Claire had struck those lines from the public version. Second, and this was the real kicker, tucked away in the financial disclosures from 2 years ago. Claire Monroe owned shares in Riverstone Developments. The same company is now pouring concrete over my creek. You could smell the corruption through the paper. But that wasn't all. I needed to know more. Not just about the HOA, but about the land itself. So I drove to the county records office. The clerk there, an older guy named Gerald, looked up when I asked about water systems around Willow Ridge. "You're looking into the old Whitmore lines?" he asked. I blinked. "Whitmore?" Gerald nodded, reached into a back shelf, and came out with a stack of folders that looked older than most cars on the road. Inside, a treasure trove, maps, hand-drawn schematics, geological surveys, a hydrological report from 1934 warning that alterations to Willow Creek may destabilize runoff control for the surrounding valley. This wasn't just a pretty stream. This creek was the pressure valve for an underground water table spanning the entire neighborhood. Blocking it wasn't just stupid, it was dangerous. And guess what else? A name kept showing up in those documents. Samuel Whitmore, a 19th century engineer who designed a network of natural overflow channels that ran under parts of Willow Ridge. They were built to absorb floodwater during heavy rains, a primitive, gravity-fed flood management system designed to kick in only when water levels got critical. The core of that system? The creek. Cut off the creek, and those channels go dormant until the underground pressure gets too high. Then, water goes wherever it damn well pleases, and usually, that means up. I stood in the middle of my backyard that night, flashlight in hand, staring at the dry grass that had once been rich and damp from the creek. Now it was silent, but beneath it, a sleeping giant. A hydrological bomb with a 100-year fuse, and Claire Monroe had just lit it. The next day, I called in a few favors. My buddy Nate from the university let me borrow some ground-penetrating radar equipment. I scanned the soil across the public easement behind my house, following the line of the creek and the suspected Whitmore channels. The results? Channels still intact, silted over, dormant, forgotten, but there, ready. I didn't need to sabotage Claire. I didn't need to break a single law. All I had to do was restore what had always been there. Let nature speak for itself. Let Whitmore's genius engineering and a good hard rain do what HOA meetings never could, tell the truth. Loud and clear. After discovering the buried Whitmore system, my mission became clear. Document, prepare, wait. I wasn't going to dig trenches in the dead of night or chain myself to a tree. I was going to build a case so airtight it could choke a courtroom. First step, paperwork. I put together a full technical report. Satellite overlays showing the blocked creek, radar scans of the buried channels, annotated schematics from the 1930s, and 1880s hydrological flow simulations showing what would happen if the creek remained blocked during a major rain event. Spoiler alert, it wasn't pretty. It showed pressure building below the estates that Claire's cronies had built their mansions on, pressure that would find a way out. And when it did, it'd come up straight through their perfectly manicured pavilion gardens. Second step, legal cover. I filed a complaint with the State Department of Environmental Protection, citing illegal obstruction of a protected waterway. Then I sent copies of my findings to the County Water Board, the local zoning commission, the Office of Historical Preservation, because the Whitmore system? Yeah, it's officially considered a historical artifact under state law. And just to be thorough, I mailed it to every member of the HOA board too. Registered mail, with signatures. They couldn't say they didn't know. Then came the unexpected visit. It was around 5:30 p.m. when Melissa Grant showed up at my door, HOA board member, marketing exec, Sharp, professional, always polite at meetings. That night she looked rattled. "Can I come in?" she asked. I poured her coffee, sat her down, and let her talk. What she told me made everything make sense and made my blood run cold. Claire has been coercing votes behind the scenes, promising certain board members shares in her development company, threatening others with zoning violations if they push back. I voted no on the project, so did a few others, but she falsified the record. She pulled out her phone. I recorded everything. She played audio clips that sounded like they came straight out of a courtroom drama. Claire, vote for the rec center plan, and I promise your property value will go up by 20%. And you might find a little extra in your consulting fund if you play your cards right. Another clip. If Margaret doesn't vote yes, I'll report her home-based business for code violations. She'll be shut down in a week. And The last one? Claire, talking to her contractor, "Just fill the damn creek. Nobody cares about frogs. If it floods, we'll blame poor lawn maintenance." I stared at Melissa. "Why are you giving me this now?" She looked down at her coffee. "Because my sister's a marine biologist. I told her what we were doing, and she said, we're not just breaking laws. We're destroying a rare freshwater mussel habitat. And because I'm done being silent." I nodded slowly. "Good. Then help me finish this." Melissa agreed to testify if it came to that. She gave me every recording, every message, even screenshots of Claire's emails pressuring board members. By the end of the night, my evidence binder looked like a loaded shotgun aimed at the heart of the HOA. And just then, the forecast changed. Late that night, I checked the weather radar. A slow-moving low-pressure system was rolling in from the west. Heavy rain. Lots of it. Starting Friday night. Lasting through Sunday. 3 days. That's all I needed, so I went back to work. Not with sabotage. Not with lawsuits, but with a shovel. I returned to the public easement behind my property and started carefully uncovering the original Whitmore channels. I followed the maps. I documented every foot. I installed a filtration mesh to prevent debris. And I left everything exactly as Whitmore designed it, dormant until pressure rises. I wasn't creating a flood. Was simply restoring nature's escape route, the one Claire thought she could erase with concrete and arrogance. By Thursday night, the sky was already darkening. The air was heavy. The creek behind my house was silent, choked by Claire's concrete. But beneath the ground, the Whitmore system was waking up, and Claire Monroe, she had no idea what was coming. Friday night, the clouds rolled in like an omen, the kind of storm front that old farmers call by name, the kind that makes birds go quiet and air stand still, that kind. Meanwhile, the HOA was setting up for their celebration of progress. Party at the brand-new concrete plaza, formerly known as Willow Ridge Creek, tents, caterers, white string lights, even a live jazz band. Claire Monroe was making her final power play. I watched from my porch as trucks unloaded furniture onto a lawn that had been compacted by heavy machinery and sealed off from its natural drainage. Sipped my coffee. "Let the queen have her banquet," I murmured. "The moat's filling up." Saturday morning, wet and getting wetter by 10 a.m., the rain was coming down steady. By noon, it was a wall of water. I went for a walk, umbrella in hand, boots in mud. The new park paths were already puddling. The grass, starved of real soil, had begun to float. Meanwhile, my restored Whitmore channels? Dry waiting. They were designed to activate only when the land cried for help. Claire, of course, remained defiant. She posted on the HOA app, "Rain or shine, the celebration continues. Join us under the tents to see the future of Willow Ridge." 2 p.m. The storm hits, full force. I stayed home, sat on my back porch, watched, and just like clockwork. Ground shifted. At first it was subtle, a few muddy trickles rising from Claire's lawn like soda bubbles from under a lid. Then it gushed. From the lawns. From beneath patio tiles. From newly sealed planter beds. Water surged upward through the soil, desperately trying to escape the pressure building underneath, and it found the path of least resistance, back through the Whitmore channels, right into the lowlands where 6 HOA board members, Claire included, had built their luxury pavilions, koi ponds, and overpriced wine cellars. PM. Nature's comeback. Tour. I saw the first scream from across the park, Claire's voice high and panicked. What's happening? Why is the ground moving? The guests, investors, city council, hopefuls, and whatever developer sycophants she had invited, were ankle-deep in mud. The jazz band had stopped playing. One of the caterers slipped on a submerged stepping stone and took an entire tray of champagne flutes into the marsh. The $100,000 pavilion garden was now a rice paddy. Daniel Foster, the HOA treasurer, always smug in meetings, came running toward Claire holding a soaked laptop over his head. My financial records! My QuickBooks is floating! Margaret, one of the board members who had voted yes in exchange for having her pool violation ignored, yelled from across the lawn, My wine cellar is flooding! That's a $75,000 Bordeaux collection! Even the custom in-ground pool next door had begun bubbling from beneath, groundwater forcing itself into the foundation, turning it into a reverse fountain. I stood at the edge of my property, dry, stable, untouched, and watched it all unfold, exactly as Whitmore had planned, exactly as I had warned. Walter Green joined me, raincoat draped over his shoulders, binoculars in hand. She's gonna blame you, you know, he said, handing me a thermos of hot tea. I nodded. Let her. I didn't flood anything. I just gave the water a choice. 5 Saturday p.m. The blame game. Begins Claire called the cops. She stood in her designer raincoat, caked in mud, mascara streaking, screaming into her phone. He sabotaged us, that Dawson guy. He did something. I want him arrested. I could hear her from across the yard. 2 officers showed up, knocked on my door. I handed them a binder of maps, drone photos, radar scans, and historical permits. Explained everything, calmly and clearly. They nodded. Mr. Dawson, we're not here to arrest you. Just doing our due diligence. Claire stood, in the background, watching, arms shaking, rage in her eyes, fear creeping in behind it, because deep down, she knew. This wasn't sabotage. This was justice. 140 years of design, rising up to remind her of the first rule of water management. Water doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about board votes, or property values, or fake permits. Water finds a way. The morning after the flood, there was a knock at my door. Not a neighbor, not a landscaper, a state environmental inspector. His name was Monroe, mid-50s, steel gray shirt, mud-caked boots, and a leather folio under one arm. Mr. Dawson? He asked, glancing at the creek that had begun to whisper again beneath the early light. We reviewed your report. After last night, let's just say the evidence is a lot easier to see in person. I poured him coffee and let him do his work. He pulled out my submitted diagrams, overlays, aerials, old maps. He laid them across my patio table and gave a small nod of approval. These Whitmore channels? They're exactly where the historical records said they'd be. And what you did wasn't just legal. He looked up and smiled. It's protected under the State Historical Restoration Act. Claire, on the other hand, she wasn't doing so well. Monroe had visited her property that morning. The scene was vivid. Cracked patio stones, submerged rose gardens, foundation walls buckling from below, and at the heart of it, a creek she thought she could silence, roaring back with a vengeance. But worse than the water, the paperwork. No, environmental permits, falsified signatures, approval dates that didn't match submission logs, and a missing impact report, one required by law for any disturbance to a natural waterway. Monroe didn't need a search warrant. Nature had already blown the case wide open. By 4 p.m., an emergency HOA meeting was called. The community center reeked of mildew and regret. Claire arrived late, soaked from rain, eyeliner streaked, high heels squelching on the vinyl tile. She looked less like a leader and more like a woman standing in the ruins of her empire. I sat in the third row, quiet, calm. I didn't need to speak. The truth had already found its voice. Then Melissa stood up, board member, marketing exec. Nervous but resolute, she walked to the front of the room, pulled out her phone, and tapped play. Claire's voice filled the hall. Vote yes, and I promise your home value goes up. Plus, let's just say certain members might receive additional incentives. A few people gasped. Then came a second recording. Margaret doesn't vote for the rec center? Fine. I'll report her soap business for zoning violations. She'll be shut down in a week. And a third. Just fill the damn creek. If it floods, blame poor lawn maintenance. They'll believe anything if it's got a letterhead. The room went silent. Daniel Foster, the HOA treasurer whose laptop was still drying from last night, stood up, red-faced. I was told this was for the good of the community. You never said a word about flood zones or rare species or buried channels. Another board member shouted. She threatened to expose my unapproved deck extension if I didn't vote yes. One by one, the people Claire had manipulated, intimidated, began to speak. And just like that, her support collapsed. Claire tried to shout over the noise. This is all fake. Dawson's behind it. He's orchestrating a smear campaign. Monroe stepped forward, calm as ever. Ma'am, we've verified the documents. The signatures are forged. The permits are invalid. And you've received over $200,000 in payments from the very contractor hired for this project. That's felony fraud and conflict of interest. Her mouth opened, then shut. There was nowhere left to run. The vote to remove her as HOA president was called immediately. For once, there were no backroom deals, no proxy ballots. Each board member had to stand and state their vote. Final count, 12-1. Only Claire voted to keep Claire. I didn't celebrate, didn't speak. I just stood outside under the gray sky watching the water drain down the alley, finally flowing where it was always meant to go. Justice doesn't always arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes it rides in on a rainstorm, and all you have to do is to open the channels. 2 weeks after the vote, the papers hit my mailbox like thunder. Criminal charges. Claire Monroe, former Queen of Willow Ridge, now faced environmental fraud, forgery of public documents, misuse of HOA funds, tampering with protected waterways, and 1 count of willful endangerment. The charges came with a fine that would choke a hedge fund and 600 hours of mandated environmental community service. Poetic. The HOA board, now under interim leadership, called a public meeting to address the neighborhood. This time, it wasn't held in secret. No rushed agendas, no rigged ballots, just folding chairs, hot coffee, and residents who were still drying out their basements. Melissa stood up first. We owe this community transparency, and we owe it to the land that kept us safe despite everything we did to it. Then someone called my name. I hadn't planned on speaking, but I stood anyway. I didn't restore those channels for revenge, I said. I restored them because that's what they were built for, to protect us from our own ignorance. The people who came before us, Whitmore, Green, the ones who built with the land, not over it, they weren't fools. They understood something we've forgotten. You can't concrete your way out of nature. Claire's gone, but the damage she did is still with us. So we have 2 choices. Keep building walls that crack, or rebuild the creek that saved us. The vote that followed wasn't close. unanimous approval to restore the natural creek, officially protect the Whitmore drainage channels, and hire an environmental team to guide the process legally, ethically, and permanently. James Bradley, the E. Contractor Claire once bullied, was rehired under a new contract, this time to fix what he was forced to break. I'd never seen a man more grateful to pour concrete out of a creek than into one. Claire? She was still in town. Sort of. Under probation terms, she was ordered to work at the very Nature Conservancy Center that had been built inside her old mansion, now purchased by the state through seized assets. And her job? Leading tours for local schools, explaining how not to destroy an ecosystem. Melissa sent me a photo once, Claire standing in a green polo shirt, pointing to a diagram of the creek she'd tried to bury. Water always finds a way, the sign read. Yeah, it does. Back. At home, things changed. The frogs returned first, then the heron, then the children. We planted native grasses, pulled out the last rebar remnants from the old fake park. The Whitmore channels flowed naturally again. Not all the time, just when they needed to. That was the brilliance of it. It wasn't a wall. It was a whisper, a system that listened to the land instead of shouting over it. I don't sit on the HOA board, don't want to. But when they offered to name the restoration project after me, I declined. Name it after Whitmore, I said. He saw this coming 140 years ago. They agreed. One evening, Walter came by with a bottle of rye and 2 glasses. We sat on the porch, watching dragonflies dance across the twilight. You think she learned anything? He asked, referring to Claire. I shrugged. Doesn't matter. The creek did. 6 months later, the creek flowed like it had never been silenced. You'd never guess a cement truck once tried to kill it. Native reeds lined the banks. Kids played tag along the walking trails. Teachers brought science classes to study freshwater, ecology in real time. But the biggest change? People started listening. One morning, I got a knock on my door. Again. This time, it wasn't an inspector. It was a producer from a national environmental news show. Mr. Dawson, we've been following the Willow Ridge case. We'd like to interview you for a feature segment, how a community engineer rescued a creek and exposed a broken system. I'm not much for cameras, but this wasn't about me. It was about showing people everywhere what happens when HOA power goes unchecked, and what happens when you work with nature instead of against it. Recognition begins to spread. The Whitmore Channel. Restoration became a case study for state environmental protection boards, university sustainability, programs urban development seminars. Professor Jenkins, the hydrological historian who first helped validate my findings, published a full academic paper on the channels. It was titled, "The Water Remembers Historical Drainage Design in Modern Conflict Resolution." It won an award. Then, the Willow Ridge Act passed at the state level. A bipartisan bill, imagine that, which strengthened legal protections for historical water systems, required full environmental impact reviews before HOA development votes, and created a public database of preserved creeks and water tables. Claire's face even showed up in the committee hearings, reluctantly. As part of her probation, she had to testify under oath about how easy it was to fake approvals and threaten board members. She tried to sound detached, but the weight was in her voice. I thought I was building something lasting, she said. Turns out I was just building over something deeper. Yeah, that's about right. And the community? We rebuilt, but we did it right. We added water monitoring stations, so residents could track rainfall and runoff patterns, educational signs explaining the Whitmore system's history, and function community gardens that worked with flood zones. Not against them. Instead of burying the past, we made it visible and vital. Kids could now trace the water's journey from the creek through the channels and out toward the protected marshlands on the edge of the neighborhood. Every storm became a learning opportunity. Every sunny day, a small celebration. Even real estate changed. Not in the Claire's fantasy of concrete equals cash kind of way, but in the real way. Buyers were coming in not for tennis courts or fountains, but for the story, for the ecosystem, for the values the neighborhood now stood for. One realtor put it best during an open house tour. This isn't just a home. It's part of a watershed community, one that stood up, made a mistake, and fixed it the right way. That raised more property value than any HOA sales pitch ever could. And me? I stayed where I'd always been, on the porch, watching the water flow, listening to the frogs sing again at night. Sometimes parents would stop by with their kids and point at the creek. That's the one. That's the creek that saved our neighborhood. But the truth, we didn't save the creek. The creek saved us. It's been a year. The creek is alive, not just flowing, but thriving. Frogs in the reeds, turtles sunning on the banks, and children playing in the water like the whole thing never almost died beneath 6 inches of Claire Monroe's ambition. Sometimes, I sit under the old elm tree near the trail and just watch it move, still, steady, like it knows something we don't. Claire's still around, sort of, as part of her probation. She now works 3 days a week at the Nature Conservancy Education Center, the very one built inside her former mansion. They turned her wine cellar into a water ecology exhibit. Her designer walk-in closet now houses preserved Whitmore Channel models and soil filtration displays. And Claire? She leads field trips. I saw her last Tuesday, standing in a khaki vest with a Nature Conservancy logo stitched across the front, pointing at a diagram of the flood cycle. This is what happens when we ignore natural drainage patterns, she told a group of 6th graders, voice low but clear. Water always finds a way. It's better to work with nature than to try and conquer it. She caught my eye from across the lawn. We didn't speak, but she nodded, and I nodded back. I don't know if she's changed, but the land has. And maybe that's enough. The community is different now, too. Meetings are open. Budgets are transparent. We passed a bylaw that any major project must be reviewed by an independent environmental consultant. Melissa now chairs the board. James runs the restoration program full-time. Walter passed away last winter, peacefully, by the creek he helped protect. His ashes were scattered there just past the bend where the herons nest. And me? I'm still the guy on the porch, watching, waiting, not for trouble, but for that moment after the rain. When the channels wake up, water hums through the earth, and everything does exactly what it was built to do. I carved a small sign at the head of the trail. Hang it on a cedar post by the water's edge. Respect the creek, because the creek remembers. The story of Willow Ridge spread further than I ever imagined. University textbooks, environmental documentaries, even a policy change at the national level about HOA development oversight. But I don't tell the story much anymore, because the creek tells it better. With every storm it guides, with every garden it waters, with every life it protects, often. Quietly, invisibly, patiently, you can bury history in concrete, you can rig votes, forge papers, and pave over truth, but water never forgets. It waits, and when the time is right, it rises, just like it did here, just like it always will.